Did you ever find yourself going back into a narcissistic relationship because you were lonely? Let's take that on. If you did do that, what happened? And if you want to share what happened in the comments, you'll realize you're not alone. But you got pulled back in because you were feeling lonely. Feeling lonely is a bigger risk factor than you can imagine. Hoovering means that people can find themselves in repeat narcissistic relationships with the same person, no matter who ends the relationship. There is the real possibility that the narcissistic person will attempt to re-enter the relationship, right? We don't need to go on about what hoovering's about. You're hoovering experts. And they hoover you not because they miss you. It's because they want or they need your supply. They want to feel in control. They just like knowing that they can get what they want, and again, control you. Or they want to mess with you, because they can see that maybe you're doing well on something like social media or through a friend. And maybe you're moving on or starting up something new with someone else or a new opportunity. When they hoover, it's a power and control play. Do not romanticize hoovering. There is nothing romantic about it. But goodness, we love a love story, part 2, don't we? Part 2s rarely work out. Something led to the breakup the first time. And especially if a narcissistic person is involved, we know they're not going to change, so the love story part 2 is a guaranteed fail. So why do people get pulled back in? Even when you have all your journals and your reminders and your ick lists and even friends saying, yo, dude, this relationship was a mess. Are you sure about this? You got to remember, though, loneliness is real. And the familiar is also intoxicating. And the possibility of working through trauma or rupture or pain by getting a second crack at bat, it's as mesmerizing as the idea that you could rework your childhood or get to go through high school again without being bullied. But there are no do-overs in life. There are just lessons. But the combination of feeling lonely and the potency of that second love bomb. Love bombing is like lasagna, folks. It is often better the second time you take it out of the fridge and eat it. And maybe even the risky move of, I get what they're about, the narcissist, and I have changed too. And now that I get it, I could probably maybe make this work. And then you could throw in some of their future faking, and it never ends well, obviously. There's also a second piece of this. Going through a narcissistic relationship, even while you're in it, can leave you feeling tremendously lonely. And even as you heal from it, there's something so isolating, so existentially messed up, so confusing, so betrayal-laden that we feel lonely. And that means we may have been lonely even when we were in the relationship. So then, when the relationship goes away, even if we wanted to end it, it's messy. We feel lonely. It's hard to meet new people. It's hard to find attraction, the so-called spark. And it can mean that the devil we know is better than the angel we don't. Or that the devil we know is better than no devil at all. That's what you got to remember. As you know, I'm all about 12 months off after a narcissistic relationship. No dates with nobody. So that you can learn that working through the loneliness and not succumbing to the low-hanging fruit of love bombing is essential to healing. So just like crappy fast food can be so appealing when we are really hungry, a narcissistic person is so appealing when we are lonely. Really bad for us, but hits the spot, and then we feel gross afterwards. But when we work backwards on the natural history of our narcissistic relationships, we often see that loneliness was a driver to getting in, to getting back in, to getting stuck. And that could be a useful exercise for you. Go backwards. Really look at the origin story of your narcissistic relationships, especially ones where you went back in for an act 2. And if you can summon up those memories accurately, how much did loneliness play a role? And not even be the loneliness that comes from being single for a long time. It may be the yearning of still working through core wounds from earlier. It may be the elusiveness of the narcissistic relationship, and that ordinary dating relationships can't scratch that itch. It may be that loneliness that comes from a narcissistic relationship ending, and you may not consciously recognize this, but there's always something to keep you busy and to do in a narcissistic relationship. You can be better, try to be enough, wait for the good days, win them over. Narcissistic people and relationships take up lots of mental real estate and time. And when these relationships end, it's interesting. We have all this time to fill. And even though it's a good problem to have, because you're now not having to clean up toxic messes or prove yourself all the time, initially, you may feel a little bit lonely because the relationship's not there to keep you busy. For any of us who are trauma bonded, relationships represented problems to be solved, things to do, being better, doing more. When the relationship goes, when it ends, that spare time can feel destabilizing until we heal and see the time and the loss of the toxic mayhem are actually the real gift. And even when we don't talk about the repeat narcissistic relationship, but the first one, if you've been trying to date and then someone comes along after a lot of dull, go-nowhere dating, and they tick the boxes and the sparks fly, it's a risky place. The loneliness of wanting it to offset it, of perhaps wanting to be in a committed relationship. And then, of course, being single and watching friends pair off and the thought of growing older on your own, all of those things can mean that we're at risk for justifying red flags and bad behavior, or we just don't register them. When love bombing meets loneliness, it's very risky because our tendency to rationalize and justify may kick in much more quickly. We may be forgiving and excusing and set precedents that will come back to bite us later in the relationship. That means that perhaps rethinking loneliness is the answer. And we have other videos about loneliness on this channel. Loneliness is not a numbers game. You're not going to offset it by having lots of people around you. 2 to 3 good quality people are worth more than a big but selfish or entitled social group. Loneliness can also often be a sign of other stuff, a sense of alienation from the world, of not feeling seen or heard or not fitting in. And for some of that, a relationship is not a cure per se, but rather it may be that it means doing some work on deeper core issues that may be driving this loneliness. And that may be better addressed by integrating meaning and purpose into your life, embracing the aloneness for a minute, and contrasting it to what it felt like to be in a toxic relationship where you never truly felt fully safe. And be careful, especially when the hoovering happens, or the narcissistic person shows up again, and especially when you're hitting a time where you're feeling lonely or been on a lot of bad first dates. Listen, this relationship was bad enough the first time. With a narcissistic relationship, you really never want an act 2. And in fact, once it ends, you may do better just leaving at intermission. Hope that's helpful, and thanks again.